My name is Lynn. I was drafted into the Army January 24th, 1951, yes. And I got my notice. We were married in September of '51, and January of '52, I was drafted into the Army. We went up to Fort Sheridan, which is north of Chicago, and we were put together as a group, and we were there probably 3 days, and then they shipped us down to Fort Knox, Kentucky. And Fort Knox, Kentucky, which is an armored post, is where we had our basic training. We got 16 weeks of basic training. There were 2 8-week segments. Some of us got 8 weeks, and then they went on to something else. But I got 8 weeks of infantry training and another 8 weeks of infantry training. They covered all the weapons, all the things. We went through quite a bit of practice, field problems, night problems, everything else. And we finished up 16 weeks later. When I was at Fort Knox, I came home. We had an arrangement with a couple of fellas that we were with, that they drove back to Chicago, and we came home. After the first week, we got a pass and we could come home. So we came home every weekend after that. And I always remember that we'd go through, Indianapolis was halfway there. So, and then we'd leave, we'd come in on Friday afternoon, and we would leave on Sunday afternoon. And we'd get back to Fort Knox there later in the evening. One night we came back, we landed in Louisville, or we drove through Louisville, and we were coming from Louisville out to the post, which was a little way, probably a 3 or 4 mile trip, and it was probably 11 o'clock at night, and we saw them burning crosses on the hills down there in Louisville, outside of Fort Knox. And so apparently the racism was going on pretty much at that time. Louisville was one of the towns right near there. K-Town is another one that was down there, and they were all very restricted as to, the colored had their own stores. They couldn't go into any of these things. But anyway, but the troops themselves had been integrated. I believe it was not Eisenhower, but Truman that integrated the troops. He put the there was really no problem. We had a mixture of that. In fact, some of the cadre at Fort Knox was black. So, anyways, but they gave us a good training down there. 16 weeks of it, running up and down the hills. I went in there and I came out. I had gained about 30 pounds and with all the stuff I was eating and all the exercise that we had, and so that's where I was shaped. One of the things I did when I was down at Fort Knox, in fact, it was the first time we came home on the weekend. I flew home from Louisville. I got on a commercial airline. That was the first time I ever flew on a commercial airline, was that time. And we landed at Midway, which is south end of Chicago. But that was an interesting thing. Actually, before I went down to Louisville, that was as far as I got out of the state of Illinois in all my life. So anyway, we then graduated from the Fort Knox, and which was an armored tank division. However, we didn't have any tank training. Some of the guys went into the training of the tanks, on the tanks. And so then our orders came, and we're at the end of and we were assigned, I was assigned to Korea, FECOM, Far East Commission, and and I think the way they did it was they took everybody A through L, and they sent them to the Far East Command, and then from those people went to well, a lot of them went to Germany, and I thought that's what would happen to me, but it didn't. I wasn't that lucky. I was in the right place at the wrong time. But anyway, so we had 30-day leave, so I came home and spent it with my family. And then at the end of that, I had to go back. And what I had to do was report downtown Chicago. They had a troop train. And the troop train took us out to Washington, the state of Washington, Seattle. And we were on the troop train probably for, oh, maybe four days. What happened there was that I think that train's made all the local stops all the way out there. And so anyway, we got out to Seattle, and they put us up into barracks that were formerly prisoner of war camp from World War II. The barracks were typical Army barracks, wooden barracks, and you'd walk up on the front porch and the whole building would shake. But anyway, that's where we were. And we were there probably 2 weeks at least. And they were getting us ready. They sent us to what they called Pier 91, which was a Navy, that's where the Navy put us on the troop ships and send us overseas. And so anyway, they moved us from the prisoner of war barracks to the barracks on Pier 91, which were all Navy barracks. It was really nice. There were really nice accommodations and everything else. But we were only there for probably 3 or 4 days. They then put us on a ship, the troop ship. And there was probably about maybe 3,000 or 4,000 enlisted people, and about 1,000 officers that were put on the troop ship. And we lived in, we lived in the hold, which were in the belly of the ship, and the cots were stacked up 6 high. So we said 6 high, and then, so what would happen on the ship as we left, you know, they had to get out of the beds, get up on the deck in the morning, and then you got in line for breakfast, okay? Then what they did on the ship every day was they swept with brooms each deck of the ship. So everybody was out, and then everybody went on the one side, they swept it and they washed it down, then they had to go on the other side and they swept and washed it down. But no showers on there. I think they had maybe one or two showers on the ship, but there wasn't that much available. So anyway, the word was we were going to stop in Hawaii on the way over. So we were going along and we never saw Hawaii. The next stop we made was Yokohama. They pulled us into Yokohama. And we got in there, and they were going to take us up to Camp Drake. That's where they send the troops from, Camp Drake. And when I got off the ship, and they put us on a narrow gauge railroad to take us up to Camp Drake, I met a friend of mine, Ken Gotch, who was trying to get me into the data processing that they had in Japan. And it didn't work out for any reason. So we were at Camp Drake. They said we were going to have 2 weeks of training, and then they were going to send us to Korea. The next morning they called us all out. They said, you're going to Korea. So we were there like 2 days. And so they put us back on a ship, loaded us all back on a ship, and went around, took us over to Incheon Harbor. And that's where we landed. Okay, and then we landed right outside of Seoul. So they then divided us up into different divisions. I went to the 2nd Infantry Division, and the other ones went to the 3rd, and so on, so forth. And that was their basic camp there. So they sent us up to the 2nd Infantry Division, and we were up there one day, and they said we were going to be there for a week doing training before we went up. And the next morning at 4 o'clock they called us out, and we went up. We were going up into combat. We went up on Baldy, and we replaced the company that had 3 men left up there. The rest of them were either killed or wounded. So we were all civilians. A lot of us were draftees like me. A number of them were enlisted men, but we were just going up there for the first time, and we didn't know what we were going to get into. So they just took us all and gave us weapons, and we went up there, and we got attacked. A lot of mortar fire and everything else, which is the first time I was into fire. And fortunately, I had good training at Fort Knox, because I had been trained on almost every weapon there was at the time, so that was good. So we then, and it was right after a rain. Korea had a rain there, and that going up on the hill of Mount Baldy was like walking up. It was very sloppy, and you could hardly walk up the hill, but we had to go up the hill to take over the thing. At that time, we then, when the skirmish was over, we came back down, and we had to bring down the wounded and the dead. Okay, so that was the first time I saw all that. But anyway, that was that. We then had a sergeant walk into the camp. He said he got separated from his outfit. I don't know where he came from. And he had taken us up there on the first time. And we were all in bunkers, which had sandbags, and we were protected. But he laid out in the open ground, and he had a poncho over him because it was kind of damp. We just laid out there that night. And he kept us all awake, so we were attacked, which was good. So anyway, we came down, and the sergeant, they then found out that this sergeant had escaped from a hospital. He had battle fatigue, and they were looking for him. So they took and they sent him back. So here's a guy that was in battle, before, and he was kind of torn apart. So we were up on Baldy probably maybe about 4 or 5 days, and then we go back. And the way it worked was that we would be up in the front lines for probably about 3 or 4 days, and then they'd rotate us down and replace us with other troops. And they did this throughout the whole term I was over in Korea. So they brought us back, and we went back in a reserve area, which is probably maybe 2 or 3 miles behind the front line. And then we had to set up the tents, and we had to get everything. And we had a company commander who was a West Pointer, and he had us out there. We moved down off the hill at night, naturally, in the dark. We came back, we had to set up the tents, get everything set. And our company commander, who was the West Pointer, had us out there for a full inspection that morning. I thought somebody was going to shoot him. He was kind of I don't know what, but he was nuts. But anyway, so we were in reserve probably for about 3 or 4 days, and then they packed us up and sent us back up to Baldy again and replaced the guys that were up there. One of the things that that they did was we gained points, and you got 4 points for being in a combat area. And if you got 36 points, you could go home. So it depends on how many times you were up in that combat area. But they moved us up for 3 days, take us back for 2, and up for 2, and back for 3, and back and forth. And we only got a fraction. We didn't get the full 4 points sometimes. So we didn't know where we were. So anyway, we went back up on the hill, and we had, consistently, we had mortar fire. We were fighting the Chinese at that time. The Chinese were backed by the Russians, and they had all Russian equipment, and they had some of the equipment was better than ours actually. These were Chinese, and these were men or boys, I should say, anywhere from 15 to 18 years old that we were fighting. Okay, the North Koreans had surrendered in the earlier part of the war. They just came in droves and surrendered, and they took and put them in prison camps. They didn't want anything to do with the fight. So the Russians pushed the Chinese. The Russians supplied all the materials, weapons and everything for them, and the Chinese supplied the men. And the way they would fight is we would get mortar rounds, and we'd get intense mortar rounds, and then normally what would happen is they'd stop the mortar rounds, and then you expected them to come up over the hill. Well, the Chinese didn't do that. What they did was mortar rounds, and they came in under their own fire. Some of their own fire killed their own people, but they just run over just like a bunch of animals over the whole thing. So, so that's what we had to be faced with up there. So then it would be quiet, and for a day or so, and then they'd start shooting at us again. We'd shoot at them, and so that's the way it went. And we kept rotating around. But anyway, eventually, well, we'd been up there, I don't know, maybe 5, 6 times, and back in the reserve area, and so on. And one of the times we were up there, they used to bring our food and water up to us, and they used a tank. And it was a funny situation, because here comes the tank. Baldy was shaped like a soup bowl. It was hollow in there, and we were up on the ridge. And this guy brought this tank in, all buttoned up, and he stopped down in the bottom there, and he got out of it, and he came out, and he had shined shoes, pressed uniform, everything else. And he says, "Where's the front line?" And just then a mortar round came in. He took out his knife, his bayonet. He had the supplies tied to the outside of he cut it loose off of the tank, and he says, "I'm going to get out of here." So he just tried to cut the thing off, dropped it, and buttoned up his tank and got out of there, because they were trying to get that tank, because those things made a lot of noise. So anyway, so that was one incident that we had. Another incident that we had up on the front line. Bill Lutch, who was a friend, we were drafted together, and he lived in Chicago, and actually my wife knew his other brother, and so anyway, I knew Bill, and Bill was up, he was in one position up in the front, and they had a machine gun, and he got I don't know what they shot at him. It must have been a mortar round, but it bounced off his helmet and it went straight up. He came down with the hill. He took the helmet off, and it had actually a dent in the front of it. He didn't get hurt, and the machine gun was bent in half. So I guess somebody was watching out for him. But that was it. So it was a whole matter while we were there, going up to the front and coming back and going into reserve. After I was over there for a while, I think it must have been like, maybe April of the next year, I got R&R, I got leave, and he had, I think it was a 10-day leave, and they took us to Japan, and put us up in, well, we stayed in a hotel which was run by the Army, first-class hotel, and it was very good, very cheap, because we were all, and while they put us up, and we were in Kyoto is where we were, and they put us up in there, so that's where we spent our R&R. And when they shipped us over back to Japan for R&R, they got us out on the field. We were at, was it Kimpo Air Base. It's right outside of Seoul. We were up there about a day or so eating sea rations. That's what they fed us. And then they got the plane to go. And they used a lot of the flying boxcars at that time. And I was hoping we didn't do that, which they didn't for me. But they loaded all these guys on, and trucks and tanks and everything else in those things. And it took those planes, I don't know how many, about 2 miles to get off the runway with all that stuff. And they had a couple of them that went down into the Sea of Japan, taking the guys over there. So fortunately I didn't get that, but they got me out there, and whoever was going on there, we were going to go in a regular paratrooper plane, and they gave me a Mae West life vest and a parachute. And I said, "What's all this for?" They said, "Well, if the plane, if the plane goes down, you're gonna go down. You're gonna have to jump." I said, "I'm not gonna jump out of any airplane." I said, "It's gonna take you 2 or 3 guys to throw me up. I'll go down with the plane." Oh, and then they said, once you had the parachute harness on over the Mae West, which was the life preserver, that there was a buckle on there. You had to hit it so it'd come off, and so that you could inflate the Mae West, so you wouldn't drown. And if you didn't, it'd break your ribs. It'd smother you. So fortunately, nothing happened going over there or coming back. So that was good. So then we came back, and it was a nice time. I think it was April, and it was cherry blossom time, and it was very, very nice in Japan. And we did some sightseeing and all that. But then they sent us back, and so we got back to, and we came, and they flew us back, and then we got back to the outfit again. So then they sent us right up again. We were back up on the front line again. And so then it was back and forth, up and down, and skirmishes. And the other thing was we had night patrols. You got night patrol every 4th day or every 3rd day. You got night patrol. And the night patrol would go out with a squad of guys and a medic and an officer. You had to have an officer, a medic, and that to go with. And so we'd go out, we'd get that every 3 or 4 days, every night. You went out and you didn't know what you were getting into. First of all, the thing was all landmined all over the place, and you had to be careful where you walked. And you didn't know what you're going to walk into. And we'd go out, you'd go out several nights in a row or several times in a row, and nothing would happen, and then all of a sudden they'd get clobbered, And when they did this, they always had a backup squad if they needed help. And we were backup squad one time, and we got to call. Those guys were in trouble. So they took us up there. We had to go up there. And the only one, the medic that went with them, he was the only one that was really coherent. There were about 3 or 4 guys, that were killed. About two or three were wounded. And they didn't know what they did. It looked like what they did was they walked in and kicked a dud artillery because only a couple guys got killed. In fact, the one guy got killed. I had supper with him the night before, and we had to bring him back. So, and then the medic took care of the rest of them. He got them back. But I can remember going through the rice paddies there, which are diked, and then you got water. It's probably about 2 or 3 feet deep, and then diked, and water through 2 or 3 feet. And we had to bring this guy back, and he was a pretty heavy guy, and we got him on a litter, and he kept falling off. We'd have to pick him up and put him back. It was not fun. So anyway, we got him back, and that was it. But that was that kind of thing. And the night patrols were, you didn't know what was going to happen. So anyway, that went on. That was the biggest problem. Later on, they had an opening in communications platoon, and which was part of our outfit, where they were right with us. So I applied for it, and I did, and I got in there. So what we did was, and we set up the communications for the company wherever they were. And we had what sound powers, which you had those phones you cranked, and we had to set up the switchboard. We had to pull wire. We'd have to climb poles. I learned they taught me how to put those spikes on my legs and climb up a pole, and we did all that. And we'd go into a new area. We'd have to find out what wire was where and what went to what other. And we had to be careful because we're going out into some times enemy place. But no, that was, we still were exposed to it. So anyway, Christmas came, and the weather in Korea is just like Chicago. Actually, they're almost the same latitude as Chicago. So it was cold and this and that, and we had pretty good clothes at the time. And we had the real heavy boots. They call them Mickey Mouse boots because they look like Mickey Mouse boots, and parkas and everything else. And so we were equipped for the bad, and we had the winter sleeping bags, and they kept us warm. And one time when we came back in reserve, they brought a bunch of guys. They had just been sent over from the States, and so we were back in reserve, and these guys came in. And one of the things that I did, or I was doing, is I would cut the guys' hair, give them haircuts. I had my father send me some hair clippers, hand clippers, and scissors, and comb, and I started cutting the guys' hair. My father used to cut my hair all the time, but so I had all these guys I can remember that were all lined up waiting for a haircut because they'd been on the ship for I don't know how long, and how before they got a haircut I don't know. But anyway, I went out there, and they had the 5-gallon gasoline cans. They'd sit on those, and we'd give them a haircut. When I went out there, there was a great big black guy, real nice guy, Barber Jones. He was a barber for another company. We called him Barber Jones. And he says, he got me my 5-gallon 5-gallon gas can. He says, sit those dudes down here and right next to me. And he says, remember one thing, you can't, when you cut it off, you can't put it back. So he showed me how to cut hair. He really showed me, he trained me how to cut hair properly. And even, you know, even the blacks' hair, because their hair was so like steel wool. But anyway, boy, he was really good. He really helped me, and I really cut a lot of hair. So I became company barber at that time. And one of the things I used to do then was, well, I'd give the guys haircuts in our company, and we could go back for a shower. We could go back if we weren't in a combat zone. We could go back for showers, and we'd hitchhike a ride back to the rear and go and turn. We actually went to a shower point. And you got new clothes and took a shower, and then come back. But so anyway, I became company barber. One of the incidents there was I was cutting hair, and a Catholic chaplain came over. And so he came over, and I was cutting hair, and I had a towel around his top of his to keep the hair off, so he had his bars covered. And I was cutting his hair, and Wiener, who was a friend of mine, had gone back to the rear, and he was trying to get the Army to give him glasses. And he was mad because they wouldn't give him glasses. He needed glasses to see. So I was sitting there cutting the chaplain's hair, and he was up there explaining this whole thing and using all these expletives. I'm trying to tell him to hold down the language, give him the sign, but he went on and on and on. And so anyway, finally I finished, and the chaplain left, and Wiener says to me, he says, that guy's a landsman. I said, no, he's not a landsman. I said, he's the Catholic chaplain. He said, well, why don't you tell me? I said, I tried to tell you. So, no, that was one of the things that was good. They then at Christmas time we were back in reserve, and then what they did was they told us we were going to move again, which was a common thing. But this time what they did was they were going to and did get us all together and send us down to Kojido, which is an island off the south of Busan, off the coast of Busan. There's an island down there, and that's where they had all the prisoners. So we went through prisoner training. They took us through, we trained how to handle mobs and stuff like that. And these are North Koreans that we were guarding. And then they sent us down there. And it was right at Christmas time in the cold weather, so we went down, and it was like going to Florida almost. It was not as cold as where we were. And we went they put us up in Quonset huts down there. And the Quonset huts were naturally raised the way they were built, and the floors in them were boards, and the boards were probably 3-4 inches. We got a gap in them, and you get in those Quonset huts, and the wind would come all underneath that thing and come up through the board. It was colder in there than it was in the tent. So we go in and we got our tents. We set up our tents, and we went back into the tents where we were down there. So then what happened down there was every day we were divided up, into groups, squads or whatever, and we took the prisoners out to do work. They worked. We took them out to build bunkers and dig trenches and stuff like that. And what we'd do is have to get over to the compound where they were. They were in a typical prisoner compound with the razor wire, 2 strands of it with a island in it, and you bring them out one at a time, and then we'd shake them down, see if they had anything on them when they came out, and so then we'd take them out as a group, and then one of them was the honcho. They could speak English. So you'd talk to him, and he'd tell them what to do. And most of these guys were, they didn't they didn't want to fight. They just went along with this. They did this, and so we take them out and do it, and do whatever they were supposed to do, and bring them back, and then we had to shake them down to make sure they didn't pick up something when they were out, and let them go back in the compound. And this happened. Everybody had to do this. Then every once in a while we'd raid the compounds, and you wouldn't know. They'd assign, well, tonight your squad is going to be on reserve for this raiding. So we got it one night. So what we had to do is they woke us up about 10 o'clock. It was probably 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock that we were getting up, and we went over and we raided the compound. You go in there, just tear the place apart, see what they got. They had guns, they had knives, they had radios. One of the things they had was shoes. We had our original shoes that we had in basic training, and they were pretty well shot. The prisoners had new shoes. But anyway, we'd tear the whole place apart, and then they'd run the prisoners out into the yard, and we had the Korean MP would be there, and they had them take all their clothes off and set it in front of them. They were standing there nude. Well, they were sitting in a hotshot position. That's the way we always kept them. And then the Korean MP would call them up in front of them and say something to them in Korean, and step on their foot and tell them to go back in line. And he interviewed each one of them, and then they'd let them go back in the compound. But they were, well, brother against brother is what it was. So, but anyway, so that was it. And then we didn't have any problems with the prisoners, North Korean prisoners. They did what they were supposed to do, and they followed. And then one time we got the idea, they got new shoes, we don't have new shoes. So some of us took some of those prisoners behind the thing and took their shoes away from them, give them our shoes. And then they were complaining, and they were screaming and complaining about it. But anyway, that was that. But it always amazed me that, we'd go in there, we'd find things. How did they get all this stuff in there? Guns, knives, radios, batteries for the radios, which was a big, we couldn't get batteries for the radio. They had them in there. Now the compound is set up with barbed wire all the way around, as they say, two rows of it, and with a path in the middle of it. They must have thrown it over the top or something. I don't know how they did this, but they got it in there somehow. But so that's what we did when we were down there. So that was pretty quiet down there. You just had to go out and you did take them on a duty and take them back, and that was it. And you don't, not too many problems with that. So then what they did was, and one of the things that came out when we were down there, they had the ROK soldiers, Republic of Korea soldiers, assigned to us. They lived right with us. And one of the ROK soldiers, he had been in, well, he was South Korean, and he'd been over there fighting, you know, almost from the beginning, and he was in the Pusan perimeter fight. That was a very battle. It was early in the war, and Pusan was right at the tip of Korea, like Florida is, and he said what they did, they fought, and this has been recorded since, they fought, they pushed them right, the Americans in the hole, the troops were waist deep in the water. They're pushing them into the ocean. They pushed them right off of there. It was really, really a bad battle. So, and then Eisenhower had come around, and he landed at Seoul. He made an entrance into Seoul. He landed there. So anyway, or Incheon. They landed at Incheon, and he went through Seoul. So then they put us on a troop ship and brought us back. We went back into, we got to Incheon, and we were on a landing craft, which held all the vehicles, and jeeps, and everything. And we in the sleeping quarters were on each side, and and those ships were run by American Army personnel, not Navy. All those ships were done by Navy, and they had Japanese people working for them. And so anyway, they loaded us on the ship, and it was after Christmas, first of the year, and we got into this place and into these small places, and they had diesel engines on them that made the ship go. And you go to bed at night and you wake up with all this diesel fuel on you, the smell and everything. And we were eating sea rations. So we got the idea one day, because that trip I think took us maybe 2 days or 3 days to go from the south up to the north. And so one day we got the idea, we're going to go down to the galley and see what they're eating, Japanese personnel. And we went down there, and they said, they got a, can we get something? Oh yeah. And they actually had noodles, big pot of noodles. They gave us that, and they had a big pot with fish head soup. And I can still remember they had all the fish heads in there with the eyes that were boiling, and they were going around in the fish head soup, and I didn't take any of that. So anyway, we had that, but then we went back to sea rations. We got to Incheon, and there was a problem with the weather, big waves, and the tide. So we sat in Incheon Harbor, I think, for 2 days, eating sea rations, waiting for all this to calm down so we could go in. So that's what we did. So anyway, we finally got in there, and they drove up on the beach and opened the front and drove the vehicles out and marched us out. And I often thought that's how the invasions are, and boy, it was like, must have been like shooting fish in a barrel when those guys come out. But we didn't have that problem, so they loaded us on trucks and took us back up to the 2nd Infantry again. So that was then. And then they sent us to Pork Chop. Pork Chop was over by the other third division, and we took that over for a while. And we got a lot of artillery fire from them. Boy, oh boy, and then at night, what they did was they had speakers up all over the place, and they'd play all this music, real loud music, and tell us to go home. We're going to go home. You're going to lose the war. On and on and on. That's what we heard. So we were there. Nothing too exciting happened there. We came back, And then they sent us back up to Baldy again, which is our original place where we were. And some general made the comment, publicly, that Baldy is very well fortified. The Chinese will never take it back. So what the Chinese did right after that, I think they took 3 divisions of men. That's thousands of men. And they hit at one point, they hit Baldy, and that was it. It was just all those men. They just poured them in there. And they drove them back. Fortunately, we weren't up there. They drove them all the way back past the artillery. So they didn't know what happened. And so then finally, we worked our way back up again, and we got back up on Baldy. But when we were up there at that time, we'd go back to the shower point, and that was probably about 3-4 miles back. And we go back there, and all these guys are walking around in T-shirts and no helmets and no flak jackets, and they're not carrying their weapons around. And it was like a resort. And they had all these things there, and they had movies, and they had artillery was there, is what it was. There's an artillery thing there. And they said, boy, you guys really got it easy. So anyway, after all this thing happened, with the Chinese hitting it with all those men in one spot, we went back there again. It was a while after that. We went back there again to the reserve to take showers. And these guys they got foxholes, and they got machine guns set up, and they got flak jackets on. What happened? And they said, when all this was going on, there was a MiG, which was the first jet fighter. We didn't have any jet fighters at that time. Then they came out with the what the heck is the jet, the one that the U.S. has, and the MiG. He chased one of our fighters through there, in the North Korean. Just got down there, and he just opened up his gun. He just fired just the whole area. That's why those guys were. I guess they got a couple people killed with that. So then they learned their lesson. But anyway, I said it was safer up on the front line than going back there. So that was that. But no. So anyway, we were there, and then and the other thing was that each of the units in Korea were assigned a United Nations outfit that was part of the war, and we had the French. We had a French battalion attached to us. The 7th Division, they had the Greeks. The 3rd Division, they had the Turks. We got into the Turks. All these guys were professional soldiers. They were all guys that had come out of high school, and they were required to go into the service for 4 years. And then they send them all over. Some of those guys have been all over, and they're like 21, 22 years old. They were seasoned combat soldiers. And we had the French. And one of the things with the French, when they came back in reserve, they'd set up, and they brought all their wine back, and they were drunk all the time. We weren't. They had a PX there. We'd go over there and get beer and stuff like that. But no, but they were really fighters. In fact, some of them they'd get together, and we were back in reserve. They'd get together, and they'd go out and catch a Chinese prisoner, and they'd go out at night by themselves and catch a guy and bring him back in. They were kind of nuts, but anyway. So that was it. So we saw the French, we saw the Turks. We replaced the Turks in one place, and we were sitting in the bunker with the Turks, and they were talking about how they wanted to go out and with their knives, and they wanted to get a Chinaman's ear, which they were going to do. And they wanted to know if they're going to go along. He said, "You're talking to a civilian here." Yeah, I'm not a soldier. So anyway, but it was kind of interesting with them, with all the different things. Then we got the word that we had to go back to this area, and we went back to this area, and what it was Eisenhower at the time was coming over there to review the troops. And so anyway, we were there probably 2 days, and all these all these units were there, were represented there. The French, the Thailand, the Greeks, the Turks, the British, Princess Pat's brigade, us, the Marines. They all had, representatives there, and we were representing the Army there. And I remember Eisenhower flew in a Cessna and came out. He reviewed the troops, and he stopped and asked me, "Where are you from?" I said, "Chicago, sir." So anyway, but then he flew off and they sent us back. So that was it. But anyway, so that was it. So then they sent us back. We're back up on the front line again, and that's the way it went. Back up, and then we'd be moving from one place to another, and so on. But and we went to one area in reserve. It was called Camp Casey, and it was south. I don't know how far south that was. It wasn't. Maybe it was 12 miles south of the main line at the time. We were behind the 38th parallel, and then we were in front of the 38th parallel, the main line. And so we went back to Camp Casey, and it was pretty well set up camp. I guess it was, I don't know, it must have been from the Second World War or whatever it was. But we worked there, and we took us out, and we had to do, go out to the rifle range, and all this. They kept us busy, and we had then they attached a group of Puerto Ricans to our outfit, and they had done this because the Puerto Ricans they had their own army, and or their own group, I guess, and this group threatened the company commander they were going to kill him. So what they did was they took and they broke them up and put these guys in our units. We had problems with them, and we'd have to go on patrol. They were supposed to go, they didn't want to go, and we had all that kind of trouble. But anyway, when we were at Camp Casey, I was corporal of the guard one night. So what I had to do, we put these guys out on guard duty on various spots through the area, through the camp, and they were on, we took them out on a truck to replace the guy that was out there. And we got to one spot where there was a standing post. The guard had just a shack that he could stand inside of. And we had one Korean soldier, rock soldier, that was wounded, and he couldn't walk. He couldn't walk too well. So we were going to put him in there. So we pulled up to that spot, and we were getting him off the truck. One of the Puerto Ricans jumped off and took the spot. Well, that almost started World War III, because the Puerto Ricans were cussing at the Koreans in Spanish, and the Koreans were cussing them at Korean, and they were standing there, and we broke it up. And so then we went back to, then the next day in the mess hall, we had a mess hall there. They had to call in the MPs because all the Koreans got together and all the Puerto Ricans, and they actually had guns, and they're going to shoot it out right there in the thing. So it was almost, here you are behind the front lines, you could get killed. In fact, one of the Puerto Ricans stabbed the other one in the sleeping bag. Another one shot at one in the tent, went through that tent, went to another tent. I mean, it was stuff like this going on all the time. So you had to be careful where you were at what time. So anyway, but other than that Camp Casey, that wasn't too bad there. So then they finally sent us up to, we finally got our orders to go back to the States. And just before we were going back, we got new replacements for us. And it was right around dinner time. They had these guys that just come overseas, who had been on, a whole bunch of them. They've been on the ship for quite a while. I think I gave some haircuts there too. But anyway, they were out practicing with the various weapons. Make sure they knew they were supposedly have the training to handle these weapons, which a lot of them did not. A lot of them did not. Some of those guys that we had that were sent over in front line of Korea as an infantry, one was a mess steward and one was a mess sergeant. The guy was typically out of shape, and I don't think he knew which end of the gun the bullet came out of. They had to show him how to use a rifle. And so they bring these guys in, and they were practicing shooting, and we had what they called recoilless rifles. And we had 57 recoilless rifles. That was it. There was 57. There was 103. I think there was 4 of them. But this was what it is it's like a bazooka, but it's got a rifling in the barrel, and it shoots a rocket, is what it does. But it's got the rifling, and you can take those recoilless rifles, and you could 100 yards, and they had a scope on them. You could put that round in the guy's back pocket. It was that accurate, because if it was on a tripod, it was held and fired. The problem with that, it had terrific backblast, like a bazooka, like a jet. So they were out there practicing firing this thing, and they fired in there. They had their section was three of them, and then one had fired, and then the next one had fired, next one fired, so on. But anyway, these were all new guys. So the gunner sat there with his hand on his helmet. The assistant gunner opened the breech, put the rocket in, closed it, and tapped the guy in the helmet, and then he put his hand on the trigger, and then he fired it. Well, this one guy, assistant gunner, he opened the breech, put the round in, and he closed it, and the gunner thought he hit him and he fired, and the guy's arm was there, took his arm off right at his shoulder. This guy had just been come to Korea. Then they had us out looking for the arm. We had to police the area to find the arm. I don't know if they could do anything. They found it. Fortunately, I didn't have to. But the poor guy, he naturally went into shock and everything else, and he went home. But there he was, a couple of days, and shot his arm off. But and we had a few accidents like that. Guys going someplace, they'd get up on a truck and they'd hand their weapon to the guy up on the truck. And the one time, the guy handed his, well, they called it a grease gun. It was shot a .45 caliber thing. It looked like a grease gun, but it was a very tinny weapon. And he handed the thing to the guy to get up on the truck to go to church. He grabbed the guy, and the guy dropped the thing on the truck. It went right, it just blew him right apart. Stuff like that. So I think we lost a lot of people like that. So anyway, we went. We did all that, and we then we got the orders to go home. And so then we went back to, they took us back to, where did they take us to? I guess, well, back to the reserve, that's right. 2nd Infantry Division Replacement Company, which was formerly a Japanese barracks. And actually the Japanese were in Japan, dominating Japan after World War II. And they made the citizens in Korea, when they dominated Korea, they couldn't speak their own, they had to speak Japanese, and they had to take a Japanese name. That's what these rock soldiers told us. They were required, they had to. So there was no love lost between the Japs and the North Koreans, and or the South Koreans, any Koreans. So then Eisenhower says, well, at one point he said, we were really battling and we needed men. Well, we'll bring in some of the Japanese troops. And the South Korean rock soldiers that we had, they told us, if you bring them in, you're going to be fighting all of us. They weren't going to fight, they were going to fight them. So they didn't do that. They stopped that. So, but no, that was kind of an interesting thing. So anyway, we went, they got us ready to go home. They took us back, and I remember we went into, it was a big long Quonset hut, and at the front door, you took all your clothes off, you turned everything in right there. You didn't have anything when you went. including your clothes. You went in there and you took a shower, you came out the other end, they issued new clothes. And what they were trying to do is prevent people from taking weapons home and stuff like that. And so we got our stuff, new duffel bag and the whole works. And then we waited, and they had a troop ship for us. And when they loaded us on the troop ship, the day that they signed the armistice, supposedly, in Korea, we were going out. And they said that, you know, they're signing a treaty now, which that didn't mean much because they were still shooting at each other. And so we left, and we're going home. A very nice troop ship. They had whole milk. That was the first time we had whole milk in 2 years. You know, food was very good on the ship. It was crowded naturally, but and they had showers there. But the only problem is the showers were salt water. I don't know if you ever took a shower. Salt water was like doing grease, so you didn't take too many showers. But it was really nice anyway, compared to what we had. And then we landed in. Oh, then we were going home, and on the ship. And every morning we get up, we would see the sun coming up over the front of the boat. One day we got up and the sun was coming up over the back of the boat. They turned around. The word was we were going to Korea. I mean going to Vietnam. Because the French were fighting in Vietnam and they needed troops. And the U.S. was just starting to send troops over there. And we were seasoned combat troops. Boy, everybody was trying to figure out how long that swim was to San Francisco from where we were. And but what they had done, they turned around, they kept going, and they met a merchant ship who had a sick guy on. And they transferred him over on one of those lines from one ship to the other. I guess he was sick. They took him on because we had a sick bay and everything on that ship. So that was, and then they turned around, they headed us home. We landed in Pittsburgh, California. Pittsburgh without a G. Pittsburgh, California. Nobody ever heard of it. And you see all these newsreels and everything else. The troops coming home. And all the people are there, and streamers and everything else. And we pull up in there. I think there was a lonely dog walking around. That was about it. So they took us off the ship, and they took us up to the camp, signed us in up there in California. That was a pretty nice post, anyway. So I called my wife from there, and I told her I was in the States. And they're going to make arrangements to get home from there. And no, I called her. They were shipping us from that camp to Camp Crowder, Missouri. That's what it was. We landed there in California. We landed in California. They told us we're going to camp. Loaded us on troop trains again. And we're going to Camp Crowder, California. Kansas. No, Camp Crowder, wherever it was now. But anyway, so we got in there, the train's going and going and going and going. Next morning we got up, we thought we were there. You're in Fort Riley, Kansas. Oh, what happened? Well, they changed their mind or something happened. So we ended up in Fort Riley. That wasn't too bad. So that's where I was, that's where we went. And then I called my wife again, told her where I was in Fort Riley, Kansas, and that we had to go through processing, and I had to do another 30 days in the Army from there. So anyway, I called her and I told her where we were, and there were two ways that I could come home to Chicago. One way was on a bus to Kansas City, and that took 4 hours. Then you caught a train to come to Chicago. Or the local flying club had a number of planes that you could get on, but it was very limited, so you had to hurry up and get into it. So I got on that. I think the guy was charging $100 to do it at the time, which was a lot of money. But I didn't spend any money. I had no place to spend it where I was. fact, I sent it all home. She got that plus my allotment. And anyway, that. So anyway, I called her. So I got on that. So we went through. We checked out. We checked out the camp in Fort Riley, and we had to go. We had to go to the mess hall. We had to go to the supply room. We had to go to wherever, check out, make sure they turned in what we were supposed to turn in. And one of the fellas that I was drafted with originally in the Army in Chicago, he hated the Army when he went in, which everybody did. He hated it as bad when he got out as when he went in. He was drafted. And he went to Korea with us and everything else, but he had no use for the Army. He was as bad. You kind of mellow after a while with this. And anyway, Day, his name was. And so we were going around checking out supply room, mess hall, and so on. We got in the supply room. I got in there with Day, and they checked it out. And then the supply sergeant, he's been in the Army, 25 years and all. You guys are all gonna be back. You'll never make it in civilian life. You guys are gonna be all back. And that's all that he needed to stay. And he says, listen, the only reason a guy would stay in the Army is he's got money trouble, he's got women trouble, or he's just too damn dumb. Oh, and then he chased us out of there. So anyway, we got on the airplane. I did, and then this Bill Lutch, who I was drafted with again, he lived right near where we lived. So we paired up. We got in it was a 4-seater plane, and the guy flew from Manhattan, Kansas to Midway Airport. And I can remember coming in over Cicero there. I thought he was going to hit the wires with that plane coming in Midway Airport, which is the airport in South Chicago. But he landed. And we made it. I think the flight was probably took us 4 or 5 hours to fly, which would have been the time we would have taken us if we took the bus to the train to get home. And then we would have had to do the train then too. So, but anyway, we got off. We got out on the street and we got a cab. We want to go to the north side of Chicago. Okay. Now Midway is at 5600 South. Okay. 0 is Madison, and then we were like 5000 north. Okay. So okay, we got into cabs. The guy got to Madison, which is a 0. He says, "Get out." He said, "Why?" He says, "I'm not going to go that far north." So he kicked us out of the cab. We had to get another cab. It took us longer to get from Midway to home that day, than it did to fly from Manhattan, Kansas. So anyway, we got home. It was your great-grandmother's birthday. It was her day, and they were all out there to see us. And then I had 30 days, so we spent 30 days. I bought a car. I got a 53 Ford, and I then had to go back to Kansas to do my 30 days. And so anyway, my wife, I said, "Why don't you come with me?" And so she came with me. So she came back out to Fort Riley, Kansas with me. We drove back out there. And we got there, and I had made arrangements they had actually it was just a barracks which they converted for family members, could stay on the post. I had to get the company commander to approve this, the company commander of the post there, so I did that. And we got there, and anyway, we were married at the time. We had been married. And so we had to sit in the room, and we had to sit with the door open. You couldn't close the door. If you had a woman in there, you couldn't close the door, even though we were married. And we sat in there. So at night they would let you close the door. So we there. Then what we did was we went from there to Junction City, which was just outside of Fort Riley, Kansas, which was a motel. and it was all Army personnel. And so we got a place there, and we spent the time there in Junction City, Kansas. Typical Army. I mean, one night the MPs were chasing some guy down the main street shooting a .45 at him, you know, that kind of stuff going on. So it was kind of an experience. I think she experienced it, something that she never thought of, but she lived there. And then I had to go back out to the post every day, and we had prison chaser. They put us on prison chaser for one thing. We'd have to take. We assigned out 2 guys out of the stockade, and then whatever those guys had to do, if they had went with a company that was training, and I'd take them there, and they had to participate with the company, and then bring them back and sign them back in. And you spent the whole day. So if you took them out there, and the company was going to go on a 5-mile walk, they got to go on a 5-mile walk. I had to go on a file carrying a shotgun plus all the other equipment when they went on a 5-mile. But it wasn't too bad. And those guys most of those guys that were in the stockade there that we were taking care of were in there because they had been drafted at the same time we did, which was 2 years before, and they took off. And they finally caught them and they put them in the stockade. So they've been serving time in the stockade. So what was going to happen is once they get trained there, they were putting them right back in the service, and they're going to go, you know, wherever they're going to send them. So that was interesting, but that was, and then they would come up with all these screwy details they want us to do, and we did everything to get out of it. So it wasn't too bad. It was not bad. It was hot out there in Kansas, and no, it was good. And in fact, they were building the Eisenhower Memorial out there at the time, and we went to see it, but it wasn't done. You couldn't see anything, so that was it. So then when I got out, when I got discharged, we came home, and I was put in the reserve for, let's see, what did I do? I put in 2 years. I had to put in 6 years in the reserve, non-active reserve. So they gave me all these things, and I had to be ready if they want to activate me within 90 days. And that's what I went through for the next 6 years, but there was never anything there. So another interesting thing that happened was a couple of the guys that I was in Korea with, in fact, the one I still correspond with, Dan Grimes, he was a draftee. And when we came back, he re-upped. He enlisted as a regular Army, and he stayed in the Army. Actually, he was sent to Vietnam, although he was in the artillery. And he says, you know, they had the equipment that we didn't have. Anything we had to steal from somebody else. So, but no, he stayed in there. And then this Keith Owings, he was a draftee, he got a field commission. So he came out, so he stayed in the Army. And, no, and then Wiener, who was the guy with the haircut, I was given the haircut, and the chaplain, he joined up, he stayed in. He retired from that. And he married some girl from South Carolina. I couldn't believe. He was from New York. He was a typical New Yorker. And no, he was quite a guy. So, in fact, I have a picture of him upstairs there. He was wounded. He was back at the aid station. So anyway, but that was the whole thing at that time. So it was good to get out. And one of the things I got out of it was I got my education out of it. I used the GI Bill. I went back to school. I had graduated from Wright Junior College, which is a city college. Took me 3 years to do that, because the first year I went full-time, then after that I went part-time because I was married, and I went part-time, so it took me 3 years. I graduated from Wright Junior College, and then I went to Loyola in the Army, paid for most of that. And it took me another 6 years. So it took me 9 years to get my degree, but I got it, and they paid for it. So that's really the whole thing there, as far as I know. But no. So that's about the whole thing. It's you know, there was a lot going on. I had a lot of experience there. As they say, I was just a poor city boy. I didn't get, the farthest south I got was Porter, Indiana. That was as far as south I got. Probably west, I don't know, maybe Elgin. I don't know. And east, I don't know if we got into Michigan, but that was it. I never went any other place, but I sure got to travel in then, so it was pretty good.
What did you do after school?
You mean I got done? Well, I was working at my job. I worked at several companies. Well, like when I went to Loyola, well, I came out of the Army. I worked for A.C. Nielsen when I went in the Army. I went back to A.C. Nielsen's. I left there, and I went to U.S. Steel. I went to Field Enterprises, World Book and Childcraft, and I worked for them for a while. And I left them and went to U.S. Steel. I worked for them for a while, and then I went to CNA, which is where that was the insurance company. And I went there, and I was there for, I was there for 11 years. And at that time, I was going to school. I was going to school all the time in these different jobs at night. And then I graduated, and I was at CNA. And I stayed at CNA for about 11 years. And then I left there, and I went to, where did I go? Hart Chapter Marks Clothing. I worked there for about 4.5 years. I went back to CNA, and they restored all my benefits. When I went back, my pension and so I got the vacation days and all that. I left CNA again. I went to Evanston to Shan Morahan, which was an insurance broker. And I left there, and I went back to CNA, and I retired from CNA. Then, when I retired from CNA, my full-time job in 1992, well, technically it was 93. I stayed one day to be into the new year, and I got all my benefits for 93, so that was in vacation time, so that was a big chunk of thing there. And then I started teaching at a 2-year business college in Chicago. And I was there almost, I didn't realize I was there 18 years, teaching part-time. I used to take part-time classes. I'd work in the wintertime, and I took off the summers. Then I was told that, well, maybe you better take a class in the summer so they know you're here and you got a job. So I did. So I was teaching a couple classes in the summer. And that was it. But I did that for 18 years. When I left there, I couldn't believe it was there. I didn't think of how long it was, but no, that's what I did. So that was it. But no. And then I went up and volunteered at the senior center for a while, teaching classes. And I don't know. I go to Glenbrook South High School, and they do a career day there every once in a while, once a year. So, but I don't do any other thing now. So, I'm really retired. So, anyway.
Right.
Well,
how long was the conflict going on in Korea by the time you arrived?
They started in, I can remember the day they announced it. I was at Nielsen's. It was I think it was 5 years that they went on. The whole total time it went on. It was 1950, yeah, it was 52 I went in, 51 was bad, yeah, 1950, they really had some bloody battles at that time, and I don't know, and we were very poorly equipped. They were training these guys with just, and they weren't real rifles or anything like that. So in their equipment, they didn't have the equipment. Well, we didn't have a lot of equipment. Flak jackets. every once in a while they'd get a couple. They wouldn't have enough for everybody, but they had big plates in them, like this. They were overlapped like shingles, and you put that thing on, you couldn't, you couldn't sit down with it on. But then they came out with the other ones, and no, no. So yeah, so I was after a lot of rather real battles. Boy, they really was a shame. So, but anyway.
What started this conflict to begin with? And if you could repeat the question as you're...
Read today's news. It's exactly the same thing. I saved that. I say that over and over. These are all the same words and the same things that happened in 1950. North Korea wanted to dominate South Korea. And they just, they came down. They were coming down, And then the other thing, they wouldn't declare war. It was not a war, technically not a war. It was a police action. And Truman, sent us over there. And no, it was, and then the North, they were fighting the North Koreans at that time, and that's when all the North Koreans, they just, surrendered. They didn't want to fight anymore, but then Russia got China involved. And it's the same thing that's going on now. And then, the South Korea, we went in through some of those villages, which were, they're very, very poor. They didn't want us there. You'd go through there, you have to be careful. The kids would be stealing everything out of your pockets and things like that. They'd come up with a hand grenade in their hand and stuff like that. You got to be very careful with all that. So they didn't want it, and but that's they never. And it's exactly the same situation that we're in right now, except we have nuts on both ends now, North Korea and here, and the one's trying to outdo the other. But I don't know. They had, apparently Korea was given to Japanese after World War II, and that was part of their problem there, that they didn't want that. And then they tried to get this all settled, and it didn't work. We made promises to South Korea that we were going to do things, and we didn't do it. They were going to let the North Koreans and the South Koreans live in the same place, and it was just a big political mess. So I don't know, but it was 5 years, I think, that the whole thing went on. And the first years were really, really bad. Really, I mean, these guys were killed left and right. It's really a shame, and that's what's going to happen again here, unless they turn around with their atomic things. But the same words they're talking about, and the same, accusations thrown back at each and every one of them. I don't know. So it's a shame.
Aren't North and South Korea still technically at war?
Yeah. I guess they're still I guess the North Koreans are pushing down there, and I think every once in a while they take a shot at each other. I had a kid in the class which I taught after I retired. He was over there. He said that they have a sniper every once in a while. They get a sniper and he's sniping on them, and they'd shoot back at him.
And there's no peace treaty ever signed between North and South Korea.
Well, I think they kind of did something, but that went on almost till recently. I think that all those armistice talks that they were having never got signed until recently, and I don't think they signed the whole thing, or there was something that was kind of a washed out thing that they signed. But no, so that's it. And then then the U.S. got involved in Vietnam. French were fighting there, and then this one friend of mine, he was in the Marines. He was in Vietnam, and he got Agent Orange, and he was about 48, 49 years old, and totally disabled now. He has an electric wheelchair, and you know, he goes up to Heinz Hospital and he couldn't work. So I guess he's getting the benefits from the Marine, from the Veterans Association. But what a crime! So, oh.
What do you think U.S. involvement in Korea did for the United States?
Oh, I don't think it did anything. I don't think it did anything. It was just like Vietnam. It was not, you know. I had another friend that I worked with, Jim Russell. He was a career Army. His father was a career Army. He was a career Army, and he was in Vietnam. And he had shirt Vietnam, second place, because it, you know, it was the same thing. There was nothing. I mean, we were shooting back and forth and taking over, and they were taking over and back, and no result. Nobody agreed with anybody, and they just left it like that. So, no, it's a crime. So I don't know, but anyway.
How much did you know about this conflict before you arrived at?
Nothing.
Nothing?
Nothing. I didn't even know where Korea was. I didn't know what they were talking about. In fact, I remember we were standing in line to punch out at Nielsen's at the end of the day, and that was what month did they start? I think it was the summer, and they had the radio going, and they said that, you know, we're going to start sending troops over there. And this Jimmy Shellhorn, who was in World War II, he was wounded. He says, "My God, guys aren't even cold in their graves yet, and now they're going to do it all over again from World War II." So, no, I don't know. Then there were guys that I worked with at Nielsen's. They were like 2 years older than me, and they were old enough that they had to apply for draft status. You had to send in and all that, and then they joined the reserves. Oh, and then some of them were activated, and they were only activated for 6 months, and then they were let go. And then when this Korean thing came up, they told them, "You got to come back. You got to finish up your term." The guys who were in the Navy and the Army, they called them back. They were in the reserve, and you got to go back because you didn't serve your full 2 years. We had a draftee had to serve 24 months supposedly. We got out a little bit early because we had combat thing, but the Army guys, the RAs, regular Army, they joined for 3 years. Okay, so and then when we came back from Korea, we were at Fort Riley, Kansas. We had a bunch of reservists that were there, that were taking us around. They were over us, and they were going to go. Those guys, they had been in reserve for I don't know how long, and they activated them, and they came out with all kinds of rank. They had more rank than we did. His rank was frozen, and. These guys didn't even know how to shoot a gun, and they're going to send them to Korea. So they were in the reserve. They were supposed to learn it, but they didn't learn it in their reserve outfit, and that was it. So, no, was bad. It's bad. So, and that was the same way with those tankers. Those tankers always used to say, "Well, you know, we're not going to, you know, we're not going to be infantry. We're going to be on tanks, you know." No, that didn't happen. They sent the paratroopers were the same way. They did a couple drops in Korea with the paratroopers, but they couldn't. They were all over the place. They couldn't deal with the terrain, or they couldn't get them together, and they just didn't do it. So they just took all those guys and put them in the Army, the infantry. Wherever they needed men, they put them in there. That's what they did. So I don't know. But anyway.
Right. Yeah, that was pretty good.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I guess we can cut for now. Yeah, that was a lot of really good information.
These are my orders to go overseas, to Far East Command. Okay. I'm listed here with all the guys, and there I am. Private E1, which is basic. That's the lowest you can be. You're just out of basic. You become you know, private, when you get private D1 when you graduate from the school. Okay. Then it has all the other orders for whoever. Okay. This was President's Day, Washington. My wife came down to Fort Knox to visit me. This was right after I got in the service. I was drafted. And these were just pictures around Louisville. And in Fort Knox, I was in the 3rd Infantry Division, which is that's their patch there. Okay. I don't know if you need that. This is the ship going over. This is the troop ship going to Korea. Oh, here's telegram. Telegram. This here I crossed the 108th. That's where you change. You know, this international date line. This is U.S. script. U.S. script. And what that is you got to get rid of all your American money. It goes in the script. Because American money is really worth something, you know. Really, they changed every so often. So if these people got to, you know, this stuff and they change it, it was worthless. So anyway, this was a won. This was a Korean won. Okay.
What's that patch?
That's private PFC. August 2nd, 1952. I made PFC. Oh, this is you know, went to NCO school. 2nd Infantry. This non-commissioned. I went to this school. They sent me back there just before I came home. But 2nd Infantry Division school. Oh, here's R&R in Japan. These are my orders for going to R&R in Japan. Okay. So this is the hotel that I said. It was Army owned and run hotel. It was like a first class hotel. And here's a train ticket that I had to take. I had to take a train. I had to fly over to. No, I didn't fly. I had to take a train to go up to the NCO school, and I had to go to a certain point and change trains, and it was all in Japanese. So it was from Nara to Kyoto. Nara, Japan to Kyoto. Okay. This is a menu of the hotel. This is more the Bank of Korea. This is I guess that's Korean. These are all Korean.
Mm-hmm.
All over here. Thanksgiving Day. Oh, this is. We were in one spot. We came back in reserve. We went. And we were back in reserve. And when we were back in reserve, it was Thanksgiving Day, and what we did was we found out an artillery outfit was not too far away. We went over there and got in their mess hall and had a Thanksgiving dinner. Then we went back to our unit, and that night they moved us back to our own place, and we had another Thanksgiving dinner. So, and then these are articles that were in the local paper after I finished the school. This is the NCO school in Korea. This is an article out of the Chicago Tribune. Steve Kroll was a good friend of mine. I went through basic training. He lived he actually owned a farm up in Wisconsin, and I didn't know this. I had written him a letter, and then my wife saw this in the newspaper and sent us, and then my letter came back verified deceased. So I guess he got hit with a mortar round. Here's my $156 phone call.
Oh wow!
I called from what was it, California? Yeah. No. I called from when I was on R&R. I called from R&R. I had to set up them to make the call. They called from Japan to Chicago. And my wife was staying with her parents at that time. So her father got a bill for I reversed the charges, $156 at the time. In fact, the telephone company called and wanted to know if that was correct. Oh, this is this Dan Moser wrote this on top of Old Boldly.
That was the original.
Yeah. Okay, these are some leaflets that we dropped and they dropped.
What's that?
What, this here?
Yeah.
This is another one of the leaflets that I think we dropped that. Every once in a while, you know, they'd all of a sudden, bang, you get something over, it'd be paper all over the place and you'd be picking these things up. These were things that there'd be all over the, I guess it's telling them that, you know, they should give up the war. But this is a Class A pass from Fort Riley. Class A pass you can use any time.
What is it used for?
Or to get in and out of the post.
Okay.
You weren't supposed to leave without it. so they knew where you were. That's basically what it was. Well, that was it. I think that picture was taken at the NCO school.